Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn. It's a new year, and I want to spend some time talking to some leaders of my favorite legal charities and about what they did in 2021 and what they're looking forward to in 2022. Today's guest is the Executive Director of the Christian Legal Fellowship, Derek Ross. The CLF is a legal charity that seeks to advance the public good by articulating principles that are consistent with and illuminated by the Christian faith, through court interventions and through public consultations. I'm really excited for this conversation about what the CLF has achieved and what to expect in the coming year. Derek, thanks so much for joining me today, and I'm just thrilled to be having this conversation. So why don't we start off by talking a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got involved in the Christian Legal Fellowship.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for inviting me today, Christine. And I'm also delighted to have this conversation with you. I first got involved with Christian Legal Fellowship as a law student, actually, in my first year of law school. CLF is actually a national association of lawyers and law students. It was founded by law students in the 1970s, so very much originally a student movement. And we have chapters in most law schools across the country. So as a law student coming into Western law, I found CLF, and it provided a very important and special community for me as a law student, just struggling and trying to find out how I could connect my faith and my commitments as a Christian with my commitments as a law student and future lawyer. And what made CLF so special for me was how it connected those dots and helped me understand and provided a space for me to explore these questions with other students, Christians and otherwise, about our role as lawyers and how we can connect our, core commitment to pursue justice, which is rooted in our faith for many of us, with our calling as lawyers to advance justice for our clients and for our communities. After law school, I went on to do some graduate legal studies, and then I practiced civil litigation for a number of years, but was always very interested and drawn towards CLF's public justice work, and eventually came back and joined in my current role as executive director back in 2015.
So what can you tell me about the mission and goals of the Christian Legal Fellowship? Is there a particular area of law that the CLF is most focused on?
For sure. Well, at our core, I think our heart is really to support legal professionals, lawyers, law students who, like me as that first year student, are wanting to fulfill their passion for justice, rooted in their faith, through the legal profession and through their calling as lawyers to serve their clients and to serve the public good. So we do that in a number of ways. We have programs and conferences and mentoring programs. We do discussion groups. We have student chapters and student events. We provide resources for spiritual well-being for lawyers and law students. And also collectively, as an organization of lawyers and law students, we seek to advocate for justice through the laws and through participation in various public justice conversations, as you mentioned. So obviously, as an association of legal professionals, we're particularly interested in issues related to religious freedom, but we're also interested in legal issues in other areas as well, and especially in upholding the human rights and inherent human dignity of every person.
So I know that one of the things that Christian Legal Fellowship does is participate in court interventions. And I want to talk in the next segment about some of those interventions. But can you start by explaining to our viewers what an intervention is and how, what role it plays in our justice system?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, great question, Christine. And as you know, most court cases really just involve parties, two or more parties, who are asking a court to resolve a dispute between themselves. But sometimes the resolution of that dispute might have an impact or might have implications for people outside of the litigation. In other words, it doesn't just impact the immediate parties to the dispute, but the court's decision might have ramifications for other groups, other communities, for society as a whole. And that's especially true in constitutional cases where the courts are interpreting charter rights and freedoms, which potentially impact everyone. So in those cases, the courts have recognized that it's important to have other perspectives, and they may invite and they may allow outside groups to come in, not as direct parties to the litigation, but as friends of the court, as we are called.
Right. Derek, we've got to go to commercial break, but when we come back, I want to talk about some of those cases where you acted as a friend to the court. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing legal charities in Canada, and I'm doing a one-on-one interview with my friend Derek Ross from the Christian Legal Fellowship. Derek, I wanted to follow up on that last segment where we were talking about court interventions that Christian Legal Fellowship has done or is anticipating doing. And I know on the issue of religious freedom, there's been a really contentious case in Quebec about religious symbols, whether people in public sector jobs can wear religious symbols. And I actually had you on an episode earlier last year where we talked about this. What can you tell me about that case, the law in Quebec, where things stand now, and about CLF's position on this issue?
For sure. Well, Bill 21, as you mentioned, Christine, it's a Quebec law that effectively bans or prohibits many Quebecers from wearing religious symbols while at work, specifically those who are in the public sector, but it also applies to teachers. It applies to many lawyers that work with or under a contract with the government. So it applies to many in Quebec. And it's a concern. It's a real concern to us and many other groups, because essentially it's banning these symbols not because of any purpose other than the fact that they are religious. And what that says, it sends the message that religion is something that should be hidden. And we're concerned about that. We're also concerned, though, that it views religion and one's religious identity as something that can just be easily switched on or off, as if it's some type of accessory, when for many, wearing a religious symbol is a core, inseparable part of their identity, of who they are. And so, as you know, we talked about this on the previous program, but really what we're concerned about is, the government is doing this purportedly in the name of religious neutrality. But that's not a proper understanding of religious neutrality in our view. Our position is that neutrality is neutral between all religions and accommodates all believers and non-believers equally, and allows them to participate equally in the public square without discrimination. But what Bill 21 is doing is the opposite. It's not being neutral towards religion. It's actually adopting a posture that's disapproving of religion and sanctioning people simply for exercising their right to publicly identify as religious. So we're very concerned about that. This also generated a number of court challenges, and those challenges were heard together as one case by the Quebec Superior Court last year. And the Superior Court largely upheld the law because the Quebec government invoked the notwithstanding clause, Section 33. And the court found that meant that the Section 2 religious freedom arguments under the Charter and religious equality arguments under the Charter were not binding and were not relevant to the appeal.
So for our viewers who might not know, Section 33 is a part of our charter, it's a part of our Constitution that allows governments to enact legislation that violates certain parts of the charter, in this case, religious freedom under Section 2, and they can enact that for a 5-year period. They can then renew it. But it actually allows the government to enact laws that would otherwise be held unconstitutional. And part of the dispute in this case is about whether Section 33 could be invoked in this case. And it's now going to the Court of Appeal in Quebec. And you guys are involved in the appeal here, right? As interveners?
That's right. Christian Legal Fellowship is intervening in the appeal. We're represented by Montreal lawyer Robert Reynolds, and we have a number of lawyers and law students who are in Quebec. So this is very much as an association of openly religious legal professionals, something that is very much of concern to us. And so we've been granted leave to make some arguments about the scope of Section 33. And one of the things that we're going to be arguing is that Section 33 does apply to the rights, certain rights listed in the charter, but it is not a blanket prohibition that allows the government to override or ignore all constitutional protections. And especially it doesn't apply to constitutional protections that exist outside of the charter. And there's a provision in the charter, section 31, which we say makes that very clear. And in fact, we're going to be pointing to other protections that exist outside of the charter that do uphold religious expression and equality, which we say are not subject to the notwithstanding clause. So those will be issues that the Quebec Court of Appeal will consider.
Well, it's a case that I think a lot of people across Canada are watching really closely. There was news just at the end of last year that a school teacher in Quebec who wears a hijab, which is a Muslim hair covering, was let go from her position because of her wearing of this symbol, which really struck a lot of Canadians as wrong, but is prohibited under that law. When we come back from this commercial break, I'm excited to talk to you about some of your other cases you're involved in. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're chatting with Derek Ross from the Christian Legal Fellowship about some of the work his charity has been involved in the last year and what they're looking forward to in the new year. Now, Derek, I know that the CLF was involved in a pretty significant Supreme Court case about religious autonomy. It involved the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in Toronto, and I understand that there is now a decision. It came out last year. Can you give me some of the background about the case and what the CLF argued in it?
Absolutely, Christine. Yeah, so it is a significant decision. And the issue in that case was essentially the question of whether and when civil courts can intervene in internal religious disputes. When is it appropriate, if ever, for the civil courts to address those types of disputes within religious communities, which involve the interpretation, for example, of religious texts or commitments? And if that sounds familiar, it's because the Supreme Court did issue a very similar decision in a case called Wall back in 2018. And in that case, the Supreme Court held that courts generally should not intervene in religious disputes and really should only do so when there's a justiciable issue involved. That is, an issue within the jurisdiction and expertise of a civil court, such as a property dispute or a case where some type of legal or contractual right is engaged.
And what would a legal or contractual right be in a case like that Wall case, which I understand involved Jehovah's Witness and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church? What would the contractual agreement be in cases like that?
Well, in most cases, that there really wouldn't be. Those, I think, would be more the exception than the rule. But it's conceivable that in some cases, there might be an employment contract, right, or there might be sometimes property rights attached to membership, for example, in some religious communities. So there is that possibility. But what came up in AGA was the question of, is membership in a church in and of itself, does that constitute a legally enforceable contract? And so what we argued was that unless membership in a church does carry with it some type of property right, or unless there was clearly an intention to create a legally enforceable contract, it's not appropriate for courts to intervene and try to enforce and regulate religious membership or religious disputes. And that's because these relationships typically, to the extent that they do involve obligations or duties that one owes to others in their community, they're typically spiritual in nature. We're talking about questions of how do we pray and worship together? How do we understand our religious text? What are the spiritual requirements of our membership? These are largely theological or ecclesiastical or religious questions that our civil courts are not equipped to address. And the Supreme Court in AGA recognized that. They accepted that generally in the religious context, when people agree to certain rules, those are often spiritual in nature. They're not intended to be legally enforceable or judicially enforceable by civil courts. And so what the court said is membership in a private voluntary religious organization is not automatically contractual. It will always depend on the facts and whether there was an intention to create a contractual relationship. And we think that's an important clarification because generally courts shouldn't be weighing in on theological questions unless, of course, there's a specific legal right engaged.
So this was a fairly good decision then for religious freedom in Canada from your perspective then?
It was because, again, it provides important clarification, and it confirms that our civil courts are not religious courts. They're there to address questions of law. They're not there to address questions that are purely religious in nature.
So then with the dispute in that case, how would the dispute over, in the AGA case, it was over membership and whether a certain group of the membership could be removed from the church. How would that dispute be resolved? It would be resolved internally through a church's own mechanism?
Exactly. Again, unless there's some other contract that was entered into, or there might sometimes be when churches incorporate, sometimes the incorporating legislation has certain requirements and remedies for members, but those were not relevant in this particular.
And a membership agreement in itself is not sufficient unless there's other terms in that agreement as you had already described.
Exactly. What the court said was, the basic principles of intent to form contract must be met in order for it to be enforceable in court.
Well, it certainly is a really interesting case, and I'm glad that there was a good decision here. When we come back, we're going to dig more into some of the other work that you do at Christian Legal Fellowship. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're talking to Derek Ross, the Executive Director of the Christian Legal Fellowship, about his year in review and his year looking forward. Now, Derek, at the beginning of this episode, you talked about how CLF provides spiritual guidance to law students and to lawyers as well. Now, I was wondering what kind of spiritual guidance might your organization provide on areas of practice, I think specifically things like criminal defense law, where there sometimes are prickly moral issues. For example, defending a person accused of serious crimes, but also the moral issue of the importance of defense counsel in our judicial system. So how does CLF provide guidance on issues like that? What would you tell a lawyer at the beginning of their practice who wants to be involved in criminal defense work, but is also an observant Christian?
Great question, Christine. And I think that's something that all lawyers, all of us, we wrestle through ethical issues in the course of our careers, whether it be in criminal law or other areas. And it's so important that we do have counsel and peers and colleagues and a network of those that have also walked through these challenges that can provide support and guidance as we wrestle with these things. And that's really part of what CLF exists to do is to provide that network. And so in the context of criminal defense, for example, absolutely, there are difficult cases that many lawyers are asked to take on. And part of what we explore is, well, what does it mean and what are our ethical obligations? But also, how is that informed through the lens of our faith? And one of the core principles of Christianity is the inherent and equal worth and value of every person, that every person, no matter what they've done, is created in the image of God, and no one is outside of the reach of redemption. And we also know that biblical teachings talk a lot about the importance of fairness and due process and ensuring justice is achieved and that everyone is given the fairness of a fair trial and defense. So these are all themes that we unpack and explore together.
That's a really beautiful message for lawyers who are interested in getting involved, either in spiritual counseling or guidance or in membership of the organization. What can you tell them about how to join Christian Legal Fellowship?
Well, we'd certainly love to connect with them. And probably the best thing is to just check out our website, www.christianlegalfellowship.org. We have a lot of information about our programs and resources there and about all these cases, which, as you know, Christine, they're very nuanced and there's a lot of details. We've rushed through some of them. And so I would just encourage those that are interested to check out our website for more complete analysis and to please forgive me if I've missed any of those nuances in our conversation.
Don't worry, Derek. The show goes really quickly, so I appreciate you explaining it in sort of digestible bits. But the work that you guys do in these interventions, you're often represented by pro bono counsel. Is that correct? How do you find these lawyers who are interested in doing work with CLF? How do you attract them to your cases?
Well, we're very fortunate to have a wonderful network. And as I mentioned, we're an association of lawyers. So many of our members are very committed to the work that we do. And so we've been very blessed to have just a lot of people invest their time and volunteer and support us in the work as litigation counsel. We've also been fortunate to expand our in-house team, and we have a growing legal team in-house. And we also do a fair bit of our litigation in-house as well.
Now, we've only got about 40 seconds left. What are some of the other topics? Just run through the gambit. What are some of the other things you're looking forward to in 2022?
Well, there's a lot happening. We're going to be very busy this year, especially with the Bill 21 intervention coming up. But I should say that advocacy is just part of what we do. We're also very active on law school campuses. So we have events planned with our law student chapters. We also host an annual symposium on law, religion, and human rights, where we feature scholars and jurists across the country on these issues. And we're looking forward to hosting one in 2022 as well.
Hopefully in person in 2022,
Yes.
But I wouldn't hold my breath. Hasn't been a good start to the year so far. Well, Derek, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing the work, the important work that CLF does.
Thanks so much for having me on, Christine. Thank you.
We've heard today about the work done by lawyers at the Christian Legal Fellowship. Organizations like the CLF play a crucial role in our justice system, protecting religious liberties. You can learn more about the CLF by visiting christianlegalfellowship.org, including how to donate to their work, attend events, view their publications, and even join as a member. Thanks for watching. That's all for today. Please remember, a freer Canada starts with you.